On Law Weekly today, we'll talk about the constitutional provisions for the transmission of powers to the Vice President whenever the President is proceeding on vacation. Our guest is a senior legal practitioner, Ogunye. We also have highlights of what happened in Edo State when the lawyers boycotted the courts to protest the kidnap of a justice of the Court of Appeal, Justice Chioma Iheme Nwosu, plus our weekly recap of the top trending stories from the courtrooms. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Shola Shieli. My guest today is a senior legal practitioner, a consummate writer, and a very passionate advocate and champion of human rights and legal reforms. In this interview, I talk with Mr. Ogunye about the provisions of the Constitution on the procedure for transmitting power to the Vice President whenever the President is leaving the country for vacation. Here's our chat.
Well, Section 145, subsection 1 and 2 of the Constitution is the governing provision. And it simply provides that whenever the President is proceeding on a vacation or is otherwise unable to discharge the functions of his office, he shall transmit a written declaration to the President of the Senate and the Speaker of the House of Representatives, stating so to this effect, and thereafter the Vice President shall, for the period while the President is away or so unable to discharge the function of his office, act as the President. Now, that's subsection 1. Subsection 2, of course, came via the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, first alteration, 2010. And it was in consequence of what happened in 2009 when there was an impasse arising from the illness of the late President of Nigeria, Umaru Musa Yar'Adua, and the doctrine of necessity. And that amendment came into play. And it's to the effect that if the President fails or refuses or is unable to transmit that declaration to the National Assembly within 21 days, then the National Assembly shall, by a simple majority resolution, authorize the Vice President to act as the President. And until the President then transmits a similar declaration to the effect that is now available to discharge the function of his office or is returned from vacation to the National Assembly, the Vice President shall continue to act as the President. That's what the provision is. Now, what's the interpretation here? The interpretation is very clear. And of course, we have many decisions of our Supreme Court to the effect that the provision of the constitutions are to be interpreted liberally without stultifying narrowness. And even when we recognize that under Section 318 of the Constitution, which is the interpretation section, vacation is not defined, and even when we do not have any need to have recourse to the canon of interpretation, one can say very liberally that vacation will include private visits, bed rest, private holiday, etc., etc., as the President has embarked on right now, which is bringing about this issue. And so we have no hesitation in concluding that this President ought to have made that transmission, ought to have made that written declaration before proceeding on this vacation. Of course, I'm aware that certain pundits, particularly our presidential spokespersons and those who are close to the executive branch of government, have been misinterpreting the provision of the Constitution to the effect that the President has 21 days to make such a transmission, implying that if the President is going to be out of the country on a vacation or is unable to discharge the function of his office for 21 days, then for less than 21 days, he need not make that declaration. That's a lie. That's not true. The provision of the Constitution, when read literally, shouldn't cause any obfuscation or misunderstanding or lack of knowledge. What does he say? He said whenever the president is proceeding. He doesn't say anytime the president has proceeded. That means the president must make that declaration at the outset of that vacation. At the outset, the 21-day timeline, which came by way of an amendment, was to cure the mischief of a president going away and leaving the country in the lurch. Meaning that before any legislative intervention, the president must have breached the provision under section 1451 for 21 days. Meaning that it won't be said of the National Assembly that it is hasty or that it didn't even allow the president to go for 1 day before, converting the vice president into. Let's realize that we're talking about 3 arms of government, and ordinarily one arm shouldn't interfere in the affairs, internal affairs of the other, save oversight. So the president must have violated the provision of the Constitution under section 1451 for 21 days before that legislative intervention. In other words, therefore, the 21-day timeline is a reference to the period within which the president must have violated the provision of the Constitution, not a period of allowance within which the president can go away from the country without making that transmission of that declaration. So we need to be very clear. And so, without any hesitation, therefore, this president has acted unconstitutionally.
The argument that some make that the Nigerian house in London is part of the territory of Nigeria, that so the president can walk from there, is there any merit in arguments like that?
That is not true. The argument that the president can, act anywhere, he can sign the law into, that was what we were being told when Yar'Adua was sick. And I'm not implying that the president is sick now. So they shouldn't say that. They should endeavor to continue to comply with the provision of the Constitution. This president, on that issue, had acted very well, promptly, even in the past. So I don't know what the crisis is now, particularly the crisis of confidence, but if it is what it is, what the president needs to do as a statesman, as the head of the executive branch, as the person wielding the executive power, that advisors, no matter how powerful, must kowtow to, must defer to. What the president needs to do is to rise to the occasion and then say, no. I've been doing this in the past. I will continue to do it. It will not harm me. We are from the same party. This is not a coalition government. The president picked the vice president, and he should have implicit confidence in him and vice versa. So in order not for it to look as if one is canvassing for anybody to wield power in the interim before the president comes, all we say is that the Constitution that is being twisted and deliberately and mischievously misinterpreted right now does not support the contention that the president can just go away from Nigeria, and so if he's going on vacation less than 21 days, then he need not make a transmission. The Constitution does not say that.
Is there any guise under which the president can sign legislative bills outside the country?
It's an anomaly. Act of state can be conducted outside the shores of the country. During wars, we know that there are circumstances, or there could be circumstances warranting parley or discussions outside the shores of the country, outside the theater of war. And for good measure, we had the Aburi conference in Ghana, for example. We led to on Aburi we stand. Yes, the president of the country or officials of a country can sign international protocols, instruments outside the shores of the country. Nobody is debating that. And under that general rubric, under that general canopy, it may be argued that a legislation can be signed into law outside the shores of the country. But a legislation of a country is not an international instrument. It's not an instrument that was forged through diplomatic relations. It's not a convention. Even if it were a convention, that convention would still require ratification by the domestic or national parliament. We're talking about the law of a country. I know of no precedent in the United States or in Britain or in France where the laws of their country are assented to in another country. I know of no such precedent. And that's why I'm talking about posterity. We shouldn't just do things for exigency. And it was not necessary. It was because handlers of the president wanted to portray a spectacle of the president walking while he's on his private visit, that his schedules are busy. That's why they smuggled and inserted into his schedule that assent. There was no emergency. There is no exigency. That law was passed before the president traveled. The law could be assented to upon the president's return. It was a show. That's why I call it a publicity stunt. It was not necessary now.
What happens in advanced democracies, though? Because some people have pushed the arguments that sometimes we see American presidents walking in the Air Force One, signing documents and that. So the president is making use of technology and he can govern from anywhere.
It's a dubious argument. Constitutional provisions are not implied. They can be interpreted, but they are not implied. They are not supplemented. So you don't fill in the gaps and say that the Constitution has provided, so the Constitution ought to have provided this way. It failed to do so. So the judiciary will now supplement and put it. No, you don't do it. All those arguments are not borne out by the clear words of the provision of the Constitution. If you are going on vacation, make a transmission of a declaration to that effect. So all this talk about Air Force, Nigeria One, and all that is neither here nor there. The one that people are talking about, Air Force One, Trump will not go on vacation. If he goes on vacation, he goes to Florida or goes to Camp David and all that. This president says he's going on a private visit, he's going on vacation. That's vacation. If you are vacationing, it is logical. You don't work, you rest. So you can't eat your cake and have it. That's what the Constitution is saying. And we're talking about official acts now, which are not that private. We're talking about the Federal Republic of Nigeria right now. So it is not a question of if the president was going to Sochi in Russia, as he did recently, or if he was going to China, when he went for the China-Africa Summit, Africa Summit, or he was going to Japan or South Africa, as he went recently. Indeed, in another country, he signed some accords on behalf of Nigeria and South Africa, following the xenophobia in South Africa, right? Nobody is doubting that. But this president said he was going on a private visit.